Good evening, Postin B'chvot HaChazania. I want to thank the Hanhala, the Yeshiva, and also Avi, that has given me the opportunity to share some Divrei Chizuk. I was told to speak for a few minutes, and it should be more of Divrei Chizuk. It's a bit that it's Chanukah. It's Yadua, the Kashya of why it is that the Nes of Chanukah is celebrated mainly with the Nes of the Pach Shemen, of the Nes of the Menorah. There's not much that we do about the Nes of the Milchama. And the Tefillah is the other way around. The main focus is on the Nes of the Milchama, but in action, the way we are Zeicher the Nes is the Nes of the Menorah, the Pach Shemen. And this is specifically difficult because the Nes of Menorah was really something that we dealt with on daily basis in the Beis HaMikdash. We had the Narmaravi that did not go out, was the same amount of Shemen, and it stayed for longer than he was supposed to with Derech HaTeva. So that was one of the Nisim that was, day in and day out, you had B'chol Yoim, T'midin Gesidron, the Nes that was there. So what is it special about the Nes of Menorah that becomes the defining factor of Chanukah is really the question. It's the Welt's question. There are a lot of answers mentioned. We're just going to discuss some of my thoughts on it, Be'ezra Hashem. It's Yadua, the Ramban, that discusses by the mitzvah of Aaron HaKohen, of Ba'alos Chayes Haneres, that he writes, he asks several different kashas on all of the Rishonim that try to explain why it is that Shelcha Gadol Mishleim, he has major issues with all of them. And at the end, he writes, the Iker is that the reason that the Nes of the mitzvah of Hadlakas Neres, Hatavas Neres, is Gadol Mishleim, is because it's an eternal mitzvah, and it's a reference to Ner Chanukah. So Ramban says, if it wasn't the Ramban, you wouldn't believe it, because it sounds more like a Hasidic pshat, that the Torah is referencing a mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Ner Chanukah. And of course, the Midrash writes in Bereishis Rabbah, Beis Dalet, the Midrash writes that when the Psukim, the beginning of Chumash, say that you had V'aretz ha'isatohu v'avohu v'choshech al pnei som, these four words are references to the four galiyos that Klal Yisrael had to endure. And Tohu is Malchus Babel, Vohu is Madayu Paras, the Choshech, says the Midrash, is Zu Yavan, Shechshichu es Einem Shel Yisrael Begezerosehem. So the essence of Malchus Yavan is Choshech. Parenthetically, just as a side point, the only Malchus that did not try to destroy Am Yisrael in the beginning was Malchus Yavan. They were Metamed Hashem, didn't want to destroy it. Timu es Ashmanim, didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash. They wanted to use it, a beautiful edifice. We have a fantastic building. They appreciated art, structure, Chachma. They wanted to be Metamed. It was a cultural war of Yavan. So that's why it's Choshech. Choshech is dark. Everything is there. You don't see it. And hence, we have the light of Chanukah, and the Nes of the Menorah is the main element of the Nes that we remember, not because the Nes was a greater Nes, but rather because that is the essence of Chanukah. Now, Chanukah becomes, because of that, a Yom Tov of Tash B'al Peh, because if you think about it, every one of the Kelim in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, is a reference to a certain koyach in the world. Chazal tell us that if you want to become rich, you go towards the shulchan, because that's the shefa of parnasa, of the physical plentifulness. And the Shech of Torah is also from the Mishkan. Now, how many Kalim do you have in the Mishkan, in the Mikdash, that are references to the Torah. If you'd ask me, I would say, of course, the keli of Torah is Torah itself. You have the Aron in Kodesh HaKodashim, he has the Luchos, in Bava Basra, you have the actual scrolls that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote also there. So that is Torah. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says, in Bava Basra Chav Hei, and the Gemara says, Haroitze lahachkim yadrim. If you want to become Chacham, the shefa of the Chachmas HaTorah does not come from Aron. You would think it should be Mi Ben HaKruvim, Vaidaber Elav. The connection of Shekhinah with Moshe Rabbeinu, with Klal Yisrael, was through the Me'al HaKruvim, on top of the Kaparis. But that's not the shefa of the Torah. The shefa of the Torah for us comes from the menorah. Now, these two kelim in the Mishkan, to me it seems that are representatives of really Torah Shebichsav and Torah Shebal Peh. The Aron is the Torah Shebichsav, and therefore it is out of reach, just like we don't understand all the levels, the sodas, the depth of the Torah, which is, by the way, the reason, seems to me, that we make a siyum on the Torah. The Simchas Torah is a siyum on Torah, and it's the only one that we don't have to understand. We just read it every week, and when you finish it, you have a siyum. If you learn the Gemara like that, if you learn Mishnayos like that, you cannot make a siyum. But by Torah, we indicate with that we only understand the surface level. So therefore, even if you learn it without nefarshim, if you learn it without understanding, just the reading of it is reason for having a siyum. So that is Torah Shebichsav. So we have it back in the Kodesh HaKodashim, is covered by paroches. You go there once a year, and that's about it. We don't understand the depth of it. But the one that we relate to, the Torah Shebal Peh, is the koyach of the menorah. By the way, the only two kelim in the Mishkan, they have to be pure gold. Teicha Keburo is what? There are only two of them. Which one is it? Menorah and, not the Aron, but the Kaparis. There are two elements about the menorah and the Kaparis that only the two of them share, nothing else has them. One is the fact that they have to be pure gold through and through. They can't be gold plated. And the other one is that they have to be mikshachas. Can't be pieced together. And those are the two elements that you need in Limud Torah. It has to be Tocha Kibara, Gemara says in Chavches in Brachas, the whole story of Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Azariah, the Shomer HaPesach. And on the other hand, it has to be Ratzif. It has to be Bertzifus. The Gemara says, if you are stopping, Tarasin asas Kraim. Shemar Kraim Talbish Numa, that becomes the elements of Limud Torah that the person has to have, whether it is Torah Shebal Peh, whether it is Torah Shebichsav. Those are the only two things. They have to be like this. Can't be gold plated. That's not Tocha Kebara. The other one also is the Ritzifus and the continuous commitment that we have to the Torah. But L'maisa, the main element of Torah in the Mishkan becomes the element of Torah Shebal Peh, which is menorah that needs us. The Torah doesn't need you. It's sitting there behind the paroches. But by menorah, you have to clean it. You have to do the hatavas neiros. You have to put it in. The kohen has to light it, which is the teachers of the Torah. Kisif say kohen yishmer das Torah baksher mipiu. And that's why the Nes of Chanukah had to be through the kohanim, which are melamdei Torah, because the concept of Nes Chanukah is really the koyach of the Torah Shebal Peh. But and you see this in Gemara. The Gemara says Haragil Bener. Gemara Shabbos Chav Gimel. The Gemara says Haragil Bener Havil Nebaim Tamidei Chachamim. The elements of learning Torah is really represented in the Torah Shebal Peh with regards to the menorah, which is really the deeper understanding of why the menorah of Chanukah is mentioned, according to the Ramban, within the psukim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Aaron HaKohen. Says this is going to be the mitzvah that's not going to be bound only to the Beis HaMikdash, but rather is going to be an eternal part. Even after you don't have the Mikdash, what keeps us connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our connection to Torah Sheba'al Peh. And that perhaps is the reason that they needed to have a Shem and Tahir as well. Just like the Torah has to be completely through and through, it has to be Tocha Keboro. The Veld Kasha is where you had Tumos Hutra B'Sibur, you don't need a Shem and Tahir. They didn't need the Shem and Tahir. But if you understand that this is really talking about the Tahara of learning, the Kedusha that keeps us, the way you learn with Kedusha V'Tara Torah Lishma, with Ritzifus, so that's the reason that they couldn't have the Tumah be any part of their Torah, their Limud HaTorah. And that really brings to mind the words of Reb Chaim Volozhiner in Chelek Daled of Nefesh HaChaim, that he speaks about, I think it's in Perek Beis maybe there, he speaks about what the definition of Torah Lishma is, and he spends a lot of time explaining that Torah Lishma means that you're learning for the kavanah, mere kavanah of connecting with the Torah and understanding what it means. Lishma means L'Shem, the Torah itself, for understanding the depth of Torah. Now, we read it nowadays, say, you can't help but think, like, why does Reb Chaim go out of his way to explain so much what it means Torah Lishma? The real reason is, well, we don't understand it nowadays because we're not living in his time, but in the time of the Vilna Gaon, the beginning of the Hasidus movement, this actually became a very big machlokas, and there was a lot of controversy about what exactly is Torah Lishma. Many of the Hasidim, including Rosh Yeshiva's great-great-grandfather, the first Solomon Rabbi, Avraham Weinberg, this is Avraham Weinberg's great-great-great-grandfather, he writes in his Sefer Yesod HaAvodah, he spends a tremendous amount of time explaining that Torah Lishma means that you are connecting with Dveikus to Hashem through learning. That's Torah Lishma. Nothing to do with how much of the depth of the Torah you understand, but it is using the Torah as a tools of connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, he goes as far as saying that if you have Gishmak in learning Torah, that's a fault in Lishma of the Torah. You can't have, if you want to have Torah Lishma, it can't be Gishmak for you. Which, of course, is exactly the core element of what Reb Chaim Volozhiner is trying to negate. And within the Hasidim even, it was not so agreed upon. The Sachachev Rebbe, the Iglei Tal, Rabbi Avraham Sachachev, he writes in the Avnei Nezer, he writes in the Hakdama to Iglei Tal that having Gishmak from learning is really part and parcel of the learning itself. It's a must. You have to have it. And he brings a raya, I think, from the Gemara in Keresis, in the few tests. The Gemara there says, "Hamisasek b'chalavim b'arayis is chayav shkenene." Usually, when you're misasek, you will be pater. Misasek by all the averos, you're pater, because it's not even a shoygeg. It's less than shoygeg. You're misasek. But by chalavim and arayis, that the core concept of the avera itself is the hana that you have, then you are chayav because sheken nene. And he writes, he says, the hana that you have from the gishmak you have from learning Torah, that by itself is part and parcel of the learning. So therefore, it's not a fault, it's not a chisaron in learning. It is part of learning. Like the Gemara says, he doesn't bring the Gemara. The Gemara says in Chagiga Tezvav, the Gemara defines the way a person learns, the way the Torah was given in Sinai was the geshmak that the person has with learning Torah is part and parcel of the learning itself. Really, the truth is, I found a parish from Rabbi Avraham bin Nahar. The Avnei Nezer did not have it. It was found printed after his time. on Maseches Nedarim, Daf Memches, he explains the Gemara. That's, I think, much more powerful raya. He writes on the Gemara there says, if you make a neder not to use anything from Reuben, for instance, it says you make your mudar hana from Reuben, then you have a Sefer Torah that's a public Sefer Torah, belongs to the Sibur, and Reuben also has a part in it because he donated some money towards it. The Gemara says it's also to use it because you're nana from Reuben. So Frek Rabbi Avram Minar, he says, wait a second. How do you deal with the kasha of mitzvahs? Lav lahanas nitnu. You're learning Torah. It's not for hana. Mitzvahs lav lahanas nitnu. It should be mutter, even though that he has a part ownership in it. Should it still be mutter to use the Sefer Torah because it's not called hana. It says, Rabbi Avraham Minhar Zak, he says, because Geshmak and hana from learning is part and parcel of the mitzvah itself, therefore when you have hana from it, it is considered a real hana, because that is part of it. It's not that, but when you do tefillin, if you're happy about it, or it warms you up, that's not part of the mitzvah. But having hana from learning is part and part. It's an essential part of the mitzvah itself, and therefore it's considered sheken nene, as asur. And that brings really not just the geschmack of learning, but it's really an achrayus, the part of learning as well. There's a Gemara in Yuma Lamed Hey. The Gemara says that there are three different categories of people. Hillel is Mechayev Aniyim, Razman Charsim is Mechayev the Ashirim, Yosef HaTzadik, the Unzer Parsha, is Mechayev the Rishayim, the Baal Taiva. And where it goes through, how Hillel made one tarfig every day, and he gave half of it to Shomer Pesach, and half of it was for Parnassus and Shebeisai. It was tremendous ani. So you can't say, I can't learn because I'm ani, I can't learn because I'm Ashir. Razman Charsim, his father left him 1,000 cities and 1,000 shit. And still, he would take a little water and he would go from city to city to learn Torah. And of course, Yosef HaTzadik is Yadua. But what's muchach from this Gemara, I believe Rav Chaim Shavuos writes this in one of his pieces in Sichos Musar. He says muchach from the Gemara that there is a besundere din, it's complete separate din on learning Torah aside from all the other mitzvahs. In other words, you don't say, well, Hillel is mechayev people who didn't put on tefillin. Okay, you don't put on tefillin too. You can't say I didn't put on tefillin because I was an ani, so Hillel is going to say, well, I was more ani and I still put on tefillin. It's a din specifically meant for limud Torah, a separate din. Because of the chashivus of the Torah, there is a din on commitment to Torah regardless of what the person's situation is. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Samachas, the Gemara says Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, when he was sick at the end of his life, his students came to him, and usually they wouldn't because he was shemuti, right? The Gemara says in Bamitzia, the famous sugya of Tanur Sharachnai, Nunches and Nuntes Udalef in Bamitzia, the Gemara there says that because he didn't accept it, the din that Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, and Chachamim, they basically outnumbered him, and they passed him that it's Tameh. He didn't accept it, so they put him in Cherem. Because he was in Cherem, he couldn't. Rabbi Akiva stood 4 amos away from him, so basically he became an outcast in that way that he basically was alone, and people did not come to learn from him. Even though that technically they could have learned from him, but because halacha is not like him, so they didn't come to him. So he says, why are you here? And they say, we came to learn Torah. He says, what are you doing so far? Well, you didn't come all these years to learn Torah. And they kind of like brushed it off. They said, we were busy. And Rabbi Eliezer tells them, he says, Hemehani, I would be surprised if any of these Talmidim of his are going to have a regular ending. So all of them are going to be Misa Meshuna. Rabbi Akiva was there. Rabbi Akiva was a beloved Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer. He's very close with him. He says, how about me? I says, Shelcha kashem min shel kulan. Shelibacha pasuach keulam. Says, yours is worse than all of them because you have the greatest potential of all. And you know how much you could have learned from me? And you didn't. Of course, we know before we discuss the Gemara in Brachas, the Gemara says in Menachos, Daf Chavtes, the Gemara says that by Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu was shown Dor V'Dorshav, Dor Manhigav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him, and the Gemara says, Moshe Rabbeinu, Metzal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shai Kosher Tagin L'Oisius, Tarim L'Oisius. He found HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was putting Tagin on the Oisius, and says, Mi Ma'akev Al Yadcha. What is this, basically? What are these? And he says, Lasit Lava, the Sof Kamadoris is going to be a Yid called Akiva ben Yosef, that's going to darshan tilim shel halachas al kol kos v'kos. It's going to be a fellow that's going to darshan tilim shel halachas on every kos. I says, I want to see it. He says, okay, sit back, and he shows him the Beis Midrash of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is darshaning, and this is a difficult Gemara to read. Ilmolei kasav yefshar le'omro. The Gemara says Moshe Rabbeinu was nachlash daita. He got depressed because he wasn't understanding what Rabbi Akiva was saying. Take a look at Rashi there. It's a difficult read. Really, Bemis and the Maral actually writes a whole parak on this in Tiferes Yisrael, parak Samach Gimel. He actually seems to say that Rabbi Akiva he attained a certain level of understanding of the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have. So, can't say it. He says it. Take a look. Maybe you understand it differently. He says the thing of Rabbi Akiva was the pratim of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was klalim of the Torah. Some of the marals are very difficult to understand. But however you slice it, that's the godless of Rabbi Akiva. So okay, so you showed me his Torah, show me his schar. So everyone knows the Gemara in Brachas, Samach Aleph, the Gemara says the Sorkin es Besara b'Maseka Shel Barzel. The Gemara in Menachos there Chavtes says even more. It says show him they were weighing his flesh in Makulin. Something that the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, even the Goyim don't do Basar Adam like that. Even for the Goyim. And that's what happened to Rabbi Akiva. All of that goes back. So Gemara in Sanhedrin Samaches. The Gemara says because he had the opportunity of learning and he didn't. It's an achrayis of learning Torah. It's not just something nice, beautiful, it's Geshmak Torah Lishma, Vayad Varim Smech, that's good. But it's an achrayis of learning Torah. But a person can. The Taz writes in Archaim Simon Zayin, he says, Lasuk b'divrei Torah, Zedim be'ad oiske Torah secha. He is not saying it on that, he's just saying the Nusach of Bnei Ashkenaz. Instead of saying Al divrei Torah, the Sfardim Edos HaMizrach say Al divrei Torah. And because of Torah, the Minhag Ashkenaz is Lasuk b'divrei Torah. So Taz Lasuk means Harvania of Torah. To really harv and to be dedicated to understanding, a deeper level of understanding, not just shitchias learning, but to really understand it. And that commitment is a must. If you could understand more and you don't, it's Bittul Torah. That's Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He gets into a whole thing of reading Tehillim, not for now. In parentheses, Reb Chaim there says, there's a midrash that David HaMelech asked that from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that when people say Tehillim, it should be considered like Negoim and Olas. So Reb Chaim says, who says he was accepted? I found 2 or 3 different Kadmonim that they write that he was actually accepted. So let's say Ha'ara and Reb Chaim Volozhiner. But the Maisa, he says, it's Bittul Torah be'eiches. If a person is not dedicated in understanding what they learn. Now, this really brings you back. I don't want to be longer. Just one more Gemara. The Gemara says in Chulin, the Gemara in Ein Aleph, that Rabbi Yonasan was talking to Ben Azai. Ben Azai died young. It's a whole machlokes. If he got married, he didn't get married. He was one of the Arbash and Nichnasu Lepardis. The Gemara in Ksubas Sabah Gimel seems like he did marry the daughter of Rabbi Akiva. The Taisus there says, "Ya nish, be as it may." Ben Azai was the greatest chacham in his generation. The Gemara says in Becharis, Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph, the Gemara says Ben Azai himself said, "Kol chachmei hador, all of them in front of me are keklipas hashum." Klipas hashum, chutz mina kareachas. They said, aside from this bald guy referring to Rabbi Akiva, all of the other ones are keklipas hashum in front of me. And yet, there the Gemara in Chulin Ein Aleph says, but Rabbi Yishmael says, Chaval al Ben Azai. Ben Azai himself is speaking. It says, Chaval al Ben Azai, that he was not Meshamesh Rabbi Yishmael. He's discussing something with Rabbi Yonasan there about the members of Rabbi Yishmael. It says, Chaval, and Rashi says, I could have been Meshamesh him, I could have learned more from him, and I didn't. Now, Rabbi Yishmael also is included in what he says in Becharos Nun Ches, that was smaller than him. But yet he says, I could have learned something from his Derech HaLimud, and I didn't, and that is a waste of my life. There are years that a person is in Yeshiva, in Kollel, and even though the people, when they go after Yeshiva, after Kollel, still try to learn, they still are dedicated, the person always has to grow, but there's nothing like the years that you're in Yeshiva. Without stress, without responsibilities, you just shakua kula kol kula shakua in learning. These are years that will never come back. Even if you're going to be assuming rabbinic positions and being klei kodesh, kol shken, if a person is in the workforce, these years are gold. When you're in yeshiva, you could just be rakun al Torah al avoda, to learn, to chazer, to harv, and to know, to cover ground, and to go deeper in understanding. These years will not come back. And when a person has the opportunity of learning, the Gemara says in Chagiga Daf Hey, on three people HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries. And one of them is she'ef shelo lasek b'Torah be'eino oisek. Plug it back to the task that we said. The person could go deeper and understand, to harp in the Torah, and he doesn't do it. Because Baruch Hu cries on that, because it's the greatest chaval of a person's life. That a person could actually become something. Rabbi Akiva was a complete ignorant amaretz, but because he dedicated himself, he became the Rabban Shel Kol Bnei Agola. He became someone that's, the Gemara compares him with Moshe Rabbeinu. I'll just end with what the Taisa says there in Ksubas Samach Gimel. It says when, after 24 years, he came back, his father-in-law, who was a billionaire, was the richest man, certainly one of the three, he had written off his daughter Rachel, the wife of Rabbi Akiva, out of his will. So I'm not giving you a penny if you marry this Bam Amaris. And now he felt bad. 24 years, she's living in stable in some bad situation. So he wanted to be mater neder. So it comes to Rabbi Akiva not knowing that this is his son-in-law. He says, I made a neder, I want to be mater neder. So Rabbi Akiva tells him, he says, if you knew he's going to become a Talmid Chacham, would you make a neder? It's the easiest way to be mater is petach v'charata. So it says, Talmid Chacham, if you would even know one Mishnah, I wouldn't make a neder. The guy was a complete ignorant amaretz. By the way, it's a window into what the Rabbi Akiva was beforehand. And then he says, it's me. Okay, beautiful ending. In fact, Taisus, we know in Hilchos Nedarim, Ein matirin benoilad. You cannot be matir as a Pesach B'charata. You can't be matir with something that was noilad. It was not at the time. At the time, it was not a Talmid Chacham. It's not foreseeable it's going to become a Talmid Chacham. It's a 40-year Amaretz. So how can you be matir with that? Zaktaisus, he says, it's chazaka, that the person that dedicates himself, goes to Yeshiva and dedicates himself to learning, that's going to become a Talmid Chacham. This is not noilad. A person is completely mustered to learning, despite the difficulties, despite the not remembering and not being able to fathom and not being able to go. Rabbi Akiva had these problems. Not time to go through Midrashim, how it's explicit that Rabbi Akiva could not understand. He got depressed in the beginning. It's difficult for him. He was not understanding, he was not retaining. But when a person pushes and pushes and learns and doesn't give up, the Tosfos says it's chazaka that the person becomes Talmid Chacham.